Patients can't relax if you aren't. They feel your stress. And this is correlated with patients feeling more pain. In order to improve the problems of the current digital guide systems, Neo Biotech and dental practitioners
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining me again today, and also for those who watched my presentation last 2 times. Again, I'm one of the 5 directors in GAO, Global Academy of Osseointegration. And let me just briefly discuss, review at what we've discussed for the last 2 times. First week of May, we've talked about how accelerated loading can be achieved. And then 2 weeks ago, I talked about how to assess implant stability objectively. And today, let me talk to you about implant prosthetics a little bit. The first step with implant prosthetics would be taking an accurate impression. These are the photos of 3 different ways of taking impression for implants. And I'm sure there are a lot more ways to do this. But anyway, what would be your way of taking impression for implants? Are you still with using impression coping, or something called impression cap, or you take intraoral scanning impression? We all take impressions, don't we? But why do we do that? To make a model, isn't it? Why we need models again? Because we want to make indirect restoration. Like this. Those 2 zirconia crowns are nicely seated in patient's mouth. But if we could do all the dental works in patient's mouth, we wouldn't need any model, right? With implant impression, I think there are 2 important things, and we need to get 2 kinds of information. First one is the information about implant position. We need to transfer the position of implant onto the model as accurate as possible. There are a lot of prosthetic errors, and they can occur during any of these steps. And much of the errors are from the impression stage, the impression procedure. This impression error is closely related to distortion. And this distortion is caused by something called strain, produced during impression procedure. Obviously, we want to reduce the strain as much as possible. We want strain little impression. These are the photos of taking impression for implants. The left is the impression for 9 external connection implants. The right is 7 internal connections. Which one do you think is easier to remove from the patient's mouth after the rubber is set? What's your guess? Right. The right one, the internal connection, is harder to remove from patient's mouth. external connections, even though it has 2 more implants than the right case, it's easier to remove because the connection itself is weaker. This is clear when we look into the connection area. The left is external connection. This part has no friction whatsoever. So as long as the screw is out, the abutment just fall apart. But with internal connection, mostly it has friction. So even after we unscrew the prosthetic screw, the abutment stays at the position. The abutment remains, and sometimes you need to wiggle a little to get the abutment out. So that means there's a friction inside these internal connection. What does it have to do with impression procedure though? These are the photos of the impression copings. One's for external and the other is for internal connection. Has the same connection as external connection about implant and internal connection implant. When dental implants was first introduced in dentistry, which was more than 50 years ago already, we only had external connection at that time. But then these internal connections become more and more popular for many reasons. And this strong connection with friction, which most of us are using these days, is one of the reasons why we love to use them. But that friction inside the connection can interfere with reducing strain during impression procedure. So it increases strain during impression taking procedure. So some implant company like Neobiotech came up with this special design with impression copings. The hexa is reduced so that those can be easily removed when you try to remove the impression body after rubber is set from the patient's mouth. So the regular prosthetic abutment looks like this. It's regular hexa, but the hexa portion of the implant impression coping looks a little bit different. The same with Zimmer implant. I don't really know if they still have this, but a long time ago they made something like this clicking type connection for their impression copings to reduce the strain during the impression procedure again. Some people use impression caps, impression plastic caps. This is another way of reducing strain during impression taking. After the implant is through the healing period, so when someone's trying to take impression, he or she just need to connect one of the stock abutments like this, and then put impression cap on and take an impression. And when the patient goes home, the patient has this something called protective cap. And sometimes they don't even need this. Sometimes they can just have the temporary on or have nothing on at all. So patient goes home, and in the meantime in the lab, what the lab technician does is they connect another stock abutment with the lab analog. They connect them together and then put it into this plastic cap and then pour a stone. So this is what you get after the stone model fabrication. Pretty much the same condition that the patient has right now. And when the patient comes back, and this is what the patient looks like. Sometimes there's temporary on, so you need to remove the temporary, and then all you need to do is deliver this crown. It's so simple, isn't it? It's strain reduced impression, and the prosthetic part is also quite convenient and handy. There's another information we want to get from the impression. That is the impression of the soft tissue around the implant. This is an example of taken impression for implant and also for 2 natural teeth. I connected this impression coping and then took an impression. And the next step is that connecting the lab analog to the impression coping, and then place some gingy mask and then pour stone. And this is what we get from the impression and the lab procedure. But what we need to look at closely is that this soft tissue around implant is not exactly the same as this on the model, because this gingy mask material only represents the contour or the shape of this impression coping, because they just placed the gingy mask material around the impression coping. This is not what the soft tissue actually looks like. So we don't want to be fooled by that. That's why we have so many different kinds of impression copings, different contours, different emergence angles. A lot of times I recommend people to use this impression copings with big emergence angle or big contour, the fat ones, these, so that we can have the soft tissue looks like this, not like this. If the sulcus on the model, if it's too small, what the lab technician does is trimming around the implant, the soft tissue, or the gingy mask in this case. They just trim it and then start making the final crown. So if we want to have predictable prosthetic result, we want to take an impression with properly contoured impression coping, and then try to get this sulcus, the shape of the sulcus right, close to what the patient actually has. Another thing we frequently do is this something called custom impression coping. This soft tissue is properly controlled and during the healing procedure with the provisional restoration. So this is pretty much what you want to have the soft tissue look like at the end of the treatment. And this is the final result. But to come out with this result, what you have to do is you want to have the soft tissue information transferred from the patient's mouth onto the model as accurate as possible. So in these cases, you want to use custom impression coping. Let me show you very interesting photos. This is a bi-tray impression. As you can see two lab analogs sticking out of the rubber impression, which means I took an impression for two implants which are opposing to each other, upper and lower arch, one implant each. I took the impression at once. This is the final result. So number 27, the second upper left molar, and the second lower left second molar are implants. They're opposing to each other. How did I make these two restorations? Like this. I'm going backward to show you how I did it. So I made these two implant restorations on this model. But some people call, what is this though? Some people call it the average unilateral articulator, or some call this chopper. The job movement of this articulator is quite limited, but probably good enough to make these two opposing implant restorations. You can see two impression bodies, impression copings, one in the upper and one in the lower. And using a bi-tray, both upper and lower impressions were taken at the same time. Obviously, you don't even need a separate bite registration in this case. You can see the blue plastic cap embedded in the impression body. I used one of these bi-tray. Triple tray, some people call it. And this is the photo of the impression bodies or the impression copings in the patient's mouth right before I took an impression with rubber material. And this is the final result. And the X-ray afterwards. I've used this very nice impression kit from Neo Biotech, which is called Neo PICCAP impression kit. In this kit, there are two major components. One is impression body, these. And the other is PIC cap. It's an impression cap. It's made in plastic. So with impression bodies, you have a variety of impression bodies. Long ones, short ones, slender ones, fat ones, depending on the soft tissue condition. You can select one of these and place the PIC cap, the plastic cap, on top of the impression body. All you need to do is pick up that impression cap with your rubber impression. Let me show you an example. For this particular case, one natural tooth and an implant, I've used this PIC cap with this particular impression body with particular height and contour. So impression body is connected onto the implant, and now it's and then the plastic cap is placed on top of that, and it's now ready for impression. And inside the impression, you can see this plastic cap picked up by the impression. So what you need to do from now is that get another, the same impression body, connect it to the lab analog, and just place it backwards into the impression cap. And then pour the stone. And this is what you get. And this is how I made those two zirconia crowns, one for natural tooth and the other for implant. This is the intraoral photos and the final result. Let me show you a little video clip which will explain the whole detail of this PIC cap impression kit. I believe this is pretty much foolproof, very easy to use, very accurate, probably the one most convenient the impression system to use. Once those impression bodies are connected, let me ask you how you take bite for unilateral implant case, like in this case. Number 14, 15, and 17 are missing, so I placed 3 implants, try to restore 4 teeth with 3 implants. So you took an impression, and then also took an impression for the opposing arch with alginate or rubber impression. That's your choice. And then you need to get a bite registration before you send those material to the lab so that they can mount the upper and lower models, right? How do you do that? I know people do this. People use this rubber VPS or this rubber bite registration material a lot, using this healing abutments. They just squirt some rubber bite registration material into this area and then have the patient bite, and that's how you get a bite registration. But I think this is too unstable, non-rigid. I believe for fixed prosthetics, crowns and bridges, we need something very hard or rigid bite registration. I think this rubber bite registration material is still a little bouncy. So when someone tries to mount those two models with this type of bite restoration, it can cause some errors, vertical errors. So I don't think it's this type of bite restoration is accurate enough. Plus, the jaw can shift in a case like this, the unilaterally missing posterior cases. The jaw can shift during biting on that registration material, and the mandible flexes. So that's also why we get errors from the bite procedure itself. So what I usually do is this. With that kind of bite, I only make this metal substructure first, and then try to take another accurate bite restoration with something like pattern resin, which can give you very hard, crispy, accurate bite restoration. And then add porcelain on the metal substructure. And this is how you can get a very accurate occlusion of your prosthesis. Like this. You can hardly, you don't really need to reduce or change the occlusion in the patient's mouth during the delivery. But what about with zirconia crown or gold crowns, gold occlusion, which people don't really do anymore? But what about monolithic zirconia crown, where you have to have the occlusion right all at once with one accurate bite? What do you have to do? This is what I used to do. After taking an impression, and then patient goes home, and then I have the patient back in just to have this bite restoration. Okay, so in the lab, I made something like this, like a little index for bite restoration, and then have them seat it in patient's mouth, and then take another accurate bite with ZOE or pattern resin. You can do either way. I don't really think the people use ZOE bite anymore, but I used to use that, which is very accurate. But you can also use pattern resin or any hard acrylic material. So this is pretty much how you can get a very accurate occlusion in one shot. But I can also utilize this PICAP impression CAD in this kind of case to get more accurate bite restoration in the same appointment of impression taking. Okay, once the impression is taken, using another set of PICAPs, you can get quite nice or quite accurate bite restoration the same day. These plastic caps can stabilize the bite restoration on implant side. Without the caps, repositioning the bite on implant working cast during mounting can be quite troublesome, especially when the bite is quite thick, you know. Again, this bite restoration material is a little bouncy. So because it might look rigid, but it's not. So that's why it creates the mounting error. So that's a type of prosthetic error we can get. So in terms of that, these plastic caps can help us get a very accurate bite restoration like this. With these caps, the mounting procedure can be quite accurate. You can also use pattern resin if you like to get even more accurate bite restoration. We now have the PCAP impression kit for both ITI and external connections. Okay, this happens to be one for the ITI type implant. It's pretty much the same, and again, this is for external connection. The principle is the same. It just we just need to apply these 3 different kits to depending on what type of internal connection you use. And this is one of the studies done by actually a friend of mine, comparing the accuracy of these three different types of impression procedure. One is pickup, impression coping system, and transfer type, and then this PCAP system, which they call hybrid. So from this study, we realized that the hybrid system or the PCAP system is as accurate as the pickup impression system. So which is pretty good. And let's turn gear and then move on to something different. For more than 20 years, intraoral scanners have improved quite significantly. And I will not talk about the accuracy or the versatility of these intraoral scanners today. I will instead talk about how we can use the intraoral scanner efficiently in terms of taking impression for implants. Lots of people use intraoral scanners for prosthetic purpose, but some people don't. They bought one, but they just keep it at the corner of their clinics and they never use it. We've just discussed we should reduce strain during impression procedure to minimize the prosthetic errors. Implant prostheses are more sensitive to these prosthetic errors than prosthesis for natural teeth because implants move much less than natural teeth. That's why we're interested in even strain-free impression. To do that, intraoral scanners might be the way to go. We all know the digital data, such as scanning data or CAD design data for prosthesis, and etc., they are very easy to be stored in a tiny memory device like this, compared to conventional dental works where we have to make models and sometimes we need to keep them for a certain period of time until the treatments gets finished, just in case, you know. So they can be quite pain in the neck, isn't it? And also, in a case like this, if the patient is going through orthodontic treatment and then you're trying to take an impression for implant, and a lot of times you need to remove the orthodontic wire and block out around the brackets and all. But with intraoral scanning, you don't need any of these. So the whole prosthetic procedures can be quite easy and quick and trouble-free. But what about this? This is a scan data for 2 crowns for 2 central incisors. I've got this data from the lab where I send my lab work. Okay, so this is not my work, but this is someone else scan data. But when we closely look into the detail or the margins of those abutment teeth, you can hardly see margins. Can you? Here's the agony of the lab technician. How could he or she make well-fitting crowns based on this data? Probably not possible. Determining the margin of the crown needs to be confirmed by whoever does the lab work. More precisely, the CAD designer. But if the margin is not visible, there's not much we can do. Whether it's going to be short margin or the crown just simply wouldn't fit. With intraoral scanner, what we have to remember is this. With intraoral scanner, we still need to retract the soft tissue well to reproduce good margin. If the soft tissue is not properly retracted, you will not have good margin. So this is even more critical. The soft tissue retraction is even more critical with intraoral scanning than with conventional rubber impression. Because intraoral scanning is completely pressure-free or strain-free, I will say, to have good impression with intraoral scanner. The margin should be visible with your naked eyes. That's why people do not use intraoral scanner for crown and bridges. I know some people do, but I'm talking about those who got disappointed with intraoral scanner because it does not make our work any less, and our work in clinic any less. A lot of times it becomes even more work if you're not familiar with intraoral scanning procedure. I use intraoral scanner for implants more often than for natural teeth because it is so quick and easy. All you have to do is connect those scanning abutments and just scan them. What do you see in these photos? You think these are the scan errors? Especially these circled areas? You see some defects? Yeah, it might look like scan errors, but the scan data is good enough to make implant prosthesis. These defects do not affect the final outcome. Why? Because if you do intraoral scanning long enough, you would notice there's no perfect scanning. There is no perfect scan data. You can get data with pretty good result, pretty good quality, but they're just not perfect. These 3 areas, I think, peri-implant soft tissue, proximal surface of the adjacent teeth, and something called scan region, these 3 areas are what you need to focus on. You have to have these 3 areas scanned right. Otherwise, you might have a hard time fabricating good prosthesis, well-fitting prosthesis. There are hundreds of different kinds of scanning abutment or scanning apparatus depending on the implant system you use. They look all different, but they have one thing in common. It's called scan region. Each scan region, each scanning abutment has a portion of something called scan region, like this area or this area. This scan region determines the three-dimensional position of implants in the CAD/CAM program or in the scan data. It's the same for the one I use for this particular patient. As long as you have this scan region scanned correctly, your scan data is good to go in terms of the position of the implant, transferring the position of the implant onto the digital model. This is the bite-taking step with the intraoral scanner. Once these two arches are properly mounted or related, based on the bite information I've just shown you, we can start the CAD designing for abutment and also for crown at the same time. You can see through the abutment design through the full wax up. And what you will get from the lab is this: no model or whatsoever, just the abutments and zirconia crown. If these two stock abutments are not prepped or milled at all, if they are not touched at all, then what you will get from the lab is just this. Not even the abutments. You can probably have one of these stock abutments in your office, and you can just use them. All you have to do, all you need to get is the stock abutment information from the lab, which abutment you should use. So anyway, these two stock abutments, not prepped at all, they're seated in patient's mouth, and then the crowns are delivered, the monolithic zirconia crowns. Another example, this is a pre-op panoramic view for number 15 through 17. And I placed 3 implants. And this is the impression stage of those 3. I've used something called encoded healing abutments for intraoral scanning. So this is I don't do this step anymore, because this is just to get to scan the soft tissue around implants, but I don't do this anymore. I just scan the soft tissue and the encoded healing or scanning abutment at the same time. And above is the scan data of the encoded healings that I've used in patient's mouth, and below is the library of those. And these two need to be merged together because our scan data is not perfect most of the time. Maybe just good enough to be merged with this library data and replaced to produce accurate final prosthesis. I believe merging might be the one most important word in terms of CAD/CAM dentistry. It's like, I would say, proofreading. After you write reports, you try to proofread it, see if you wrote well or wrote what right. Let me show you an example of this merging. The same case that I've just shown you. The full contour wax up to preview the final restorations, and then you can see through the abutments. These custom abutments are made by milling, the CNC milling, and the final zirconia crowns. But then, what you notice in patient's mouth is that these crowns are not fitted properly. This is pretty much as good as it can get. You can see the gaps between the abutments and the crowns, and they wouldn't go down anymore. I'm sure many of you have experienced something like this. The crowns just wouldn't go in, especially when we're dealing with 2 or more implants, splinted crowns. The scan data of these milled abutments are merged onto the original CAD design. This procedure is essential because you want to verify if the abutments are properly milled according to the CAD design. And you can see a lot of times, actually most of the times, there's quite a bit of discrepancy between the CAD design and the actual milling outcome. No wonder the crown or bridge does not, fit well. If the milling outcome is smaller than the original design, that's not a problem. The crown might be a little loose, but it would go in. But the other way around can be a problem. This is pretty much why you get these not fitting crowns like this. The scan data of the final abutments are bigger than the original CAD design. So that's why the crowns would not go in all the way down. On the right is the milling outcome from the metal block, which has connection on one end already. So this is a prefabricated titanium block. People believe that if they can mill the connection part at the same time as they mill the coronal part of the abutment, they might have the better result, better accuracy, and better fitting. But I personally don't believe in that. So this particular case, this is another set of custom abutments that I've got from the lab that I communicate with for my lab works. These custom abutments are seated and tightened to the recommended torque. And this time, this crown fit well, like this. What made the difference? Again, you must compensate the discrepancy. People say, they don't like modelless work because without models, you can't really find out what was wrong with your prosthesis. Let's say your crown is high, the occlusion is high. And if the same crown is not high on the model, on stone model, it will be either the seating is not right or your impression is not right. But with scan data, without any model, you can't really do this, can you? That's why people still want to use models, and they don't want to do the modelless dental work. But as long as you can compensate, these discrepancies, you should be okay. Let me summarize my presentation today. Okay, with intraoral scanning, you can scan either of these three. You can scan prefabricated stock abutments, which would be in conventional method, it would be abutment level impression. I know some people do that. But you can also use scan body or coated abutments, which will be the same as the fixture level impression. The only difference is, with digital you use intraoral scanner, and with conventional is you use rubber impression material. So today I talked about how to reduce or how to get more accurate impression, especially for implants. And this is pretty much what I prepared for today. Thank you for joining me again today, and I really hope you get a little help or idea out of my lecture, and hope to see you all next time, sometime soon again. Thank you.